The Mariners have been linked to a utility infielder outfielder from Miami. We're going to talk about that in this video, as well as if the Mariners need to go out there and overpay to make a trade as the trade deadline gets closer. Jorge Polanco needs to be off this team, but do the Mariners really have the resources to go out there and make those trades right now? All that and more coming up.
Also, I'm sorry if you guys can hear my air conditioner. If you live in Washington, you know that it has been hotter than hell the past few days. Please bear with me.
This article from Craig Mish on the Miami Herald says that Jazz Chisum Jr. is going to probably be traded. They say he's putting up his healthiest season to date, producing at the top of the lineup, and teams are taking notice. He mentions the Seattle Mariners are a team that could use a bat and should be a club to watch if the Marlins strike a deal. He also mentions the Royals and the Pittsburgh Pirates. On the year, Jazz Chisum in 365 plate appearances is hitting .255, .326, .407, with an OPS of 733 and an OPS plus of 102. He's hit 10 home runs with 40 RBIs. He has 17 stolen bags as well. Chisum does strike out above the major league average at 24.9% this year, which is the lowest of his career, but at 28.2% throughout his entire career. He's also at a 7.6% walk rate throughout his entire career, although it is above average this year at 8.8%. Looking at his games played, however, Jazz Chisum has only played over 100 games once, and that was in 2021. Otherwise, in 60 in 2022, 97 in 23. He's up to 87 games so far in 2024, so barring an injury, he should, keyword is should, make it to 100 games. Chisum is not going to be a free agent until after the 2026 season. He'll be entering his second year of arbitration in 2025. Chisum's baseball savant page isn't anything really that special, but he does find the barrel in the 77th percentile here. Otherwise, a lot of blue on this page for him. As you can see, all of his power is to the pull side. And note his games by position here. In 2024, he has played all of his games in the outfield. Same with 2023, he played all of his games in the outfield. He hasn't played second base since 2022, although I think that if the Mariners were to acquire him, he makes a lot more sense as a second baseman than he does as an outfielder. I've said time and time again that Jazz Chisum is probably the most overrated trade target for the Seattle Mariners in this season and in years past, and I still feel the same way, especially if he is going to be an outfielder for you. He's a guy that you shouldn't be giving up much to go out there and get him. I'm talking like maybe one guy in your top 10, and I don't mean like the upper half of top, like maybe like Tyler Locklear, maybe. And then after that, I'm not giving you anything above like 15 in your prospect rankings, because simply I don't think Jazz Chisum is worth it. With that being said, he'd be better than half the players on your team so far this year. But that is what it's going to look like going into the trade deadline this year, because the Seattle Mariners are going to have to overpay if they want to go out there and make a trade right now. And in my opinion, they need to go out there and make a trade right now, because this team is not good enough to continue moving forward before the trade deadline offensively. For whatever reason, Jorge Polanco hasn't worked out. Ty France has been bad. Dom Canzone's been bad recently. Mitch Haniger's been bad. The Mariners need to cut the fat off of this roster, go out there and make some drastic moves. And if they want to do it in a timely manner to give them the best chance at winning the World Series in 2024, they're going to have to do it now. The problem is that no team is really selling right now. We take a look here at the wild card standings, and I would say everybody above the Detroit Tigers is probably teams that should be sellers. But even the Toronto Blue Jays, who are 8.5 back of the wild card, have not signaled that they see themselves as sellers yet. Obviously, the Angels, the Athletics, and the White Sox, those are sellers. Those are teams that are not coming anywhere close to making the playoffs this year. But the Blue Jays, the Rangers, the Tigers, these teams all might think that they have a chance going into the 2024 playoffs. They've been so painfully mediocre, but so has the top of this list here, with the Red Sox and the Twins and the Yankees being in the 3 wild card spots right now, and they're still battling out with the Baltimore Orioles and the Cleveland Guardians. In my opinion, these 3 teams right here, the Rays, the Astros, the Royals, along with these 3 teams in the wild card, and of course the division leaders, those teams aren't selling. Anybody below the Tigers should be selling, in my opinion, but they might want to wait until they get closer to the MLB trade deadline. It's even more difficult in the National League, because the team that is the furthest back that isn't named the Rockies or the Marlins is only 5.5 back in the Washington Nationals. They could see themselves as contenders for this National League wild card here, and so it's hard to look at a team like the Nationals or the Cubs or the Reds and say these teams are for sure sellers right now, because they still have a chance to make the wild card, and they might view themselves as such, and thus not be willing to give up anybody in a trade. Now, in my opinion, the team that sticks out the most out of these guys right here in the American League is the Toronto Blue Jays, because we've talked about trading for Vladdy or trading for Bo Bichette. The Rangers probably wouldn't want to trade anything significant to the Mariners anyway. There's not really anybody on the Tigers that I really want that's going to be a massive impact bat. They certainly have role players. Same goes with the Athletics, minus, of course, Brent Rooker, and the White Sox, of course, with Luis Robert. Down here with the Rockies and the Marlins, I mean, there's really nobody on either of these two teams that I think makes sense for the Mariners to trade for. The Rockies and Mariners have not made a trade in the Dipoto era, which I find incredibly interesting, along with the Mariners and the Angels. So, needless to say, I don't think the Rockies are going to be sending anyone our way. And the Marlins, we just talked about Jazz Chisum. I'm not really that interested. I'm more interested in Tanner Scott or Andrew Nardi than I am in Jazz Chisum. I'm more interested in Brian De La Cruz and Jesus Sanchez than I am in Jazz Chisum. So, maybe those guys from the Marlins, but even then, I think they still want to trade Chisum more. But let's talk about a few teams that the Mariners have been rumored to be partners with. The Cubs with Cody Bellinger and Nico Horner. The Mets with JD Martinez, Pete Alonso, etc. And again, of course, the Blue Jays, we talked a little bit about here with Vladdy and Bo Bichette, but the Rays, a team with Isaac Paredes and Randy Arozarena, another team the Mariners could want to make a trade with here. Those teams that are still somewhat in the playoff hunt are going to be the ones to look at. And in my opinion, that's because the players the Mariners want are basically on the teams that are still kind of contending. And that's why it's going to be so hard and why the Mariners may have to overpay. Because if a team like, let's say they go out to try to get Isaac Paredes tomorrow, right? We're talking on Wednesday. They try to go get Isaac Paredes. The Mariners are going to have to overpay, maybe with an extra prospect or two, to go out there and get one of those guys at this very moment, because those teams still think they're in it. So if they were to trade off Isaac Paredes now, talking about from the Rays perspective, that would signal them as more sellers than anything on this market. They already traded Aaron Savale, but they had a lot of guys coming back in terms of starting pitching with Shane Baz, etc. Trading Isaac Paredes would be a big Band-Aid to rip off in the middle of that lineup, and I think that the Rays wouldn't be willing to do it right now because they still see themselves in the race. But if the Mariners went at them with a bigger package than to be expected, like, I'm just going to throw names out there. I didn't do any research or anything into these names, but let's say the Mariners went out there and offered, like, Harry Ford, Jonathan Clase, and Teddy McGraw for Isaac Paredes. That might be a major overpay, but nonetheless, that's just my example here. Let's say they would do that trade at the deadline, sure. But if the Mariners wanted to go out there and make that trade right now for Isaac Paredes, including Harry Ford and Jonathan Clase and Teddy McGraw, you may need to throw in like another guy somewhere in that top 15 range. I don't have a name for you right now, but just somebody else to sweeten the deal, to have the Rays say, okay, fine, you basically blew us away. We can't say no to this deal. We're going to take it, and thank you guys so much. You can have Isaac Paredes. We'll have these guys for the next 6 years. Players like Isaac Paredes, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, Nico Horner are guys that I think the Mariners really need to target as they go into this trade deadline, simply because you can't have Jorge Polanco on this team, and second base is so much bigger of a need for you. Not necessarily saying you have to go out there and get a second baseman, because if you get Isaac Paredes, you put him at third, Josh Rojas moves over to second base, and all of a sudden you have Rojas and Moore at second base, and you're much better because of it. Rojas and Moore, Rojas and Bliss. You're much better because of it. Same with Horner. You can slot him right in at second base. But again, the Cubs might think they're still in this thing. So instead of a trade that would send, like, goodness, Ty Pete for Nico Horner, you might have to send Ty Pete and Cade Marlowe? I don't know. I don't know what the valuation is on these guys right now. We've had videos talking about it a little bit more. It's too hot for me to come up with valuations on trade prospects right now. I'm sure you guys understand. But my point is the Mariners need to go out there and overpay right now. They need to go out there and overpay for a bat right now and just have to deal with the consequences of overpaying for a guy that you so desperately need, because this is the best Mariners team. And I know it's so hard to say. It is so hard to look at this Mariners team and say, this is the best team since 2001. But guys, this is the best Mariners team since 2001. And obviously what we've watched recently makes it very hard to say that. But statistically speaking, for their record, this is the best Mariners team since 2001. And because of that, they need to go out there and act like it. This is their best chance in the last 20 years to make the playoffs, go deep in the playoffs, and win the frickin' World Series. All right? And so you need to go out there and make the necessary adjustments now. You can't wait for another 20 days while the trade deadline slowly creeps up on you, because everyone else is trying to make those trades too. There are plenty of, like, if the Mariners want to go out there and get, say, Luis Robert, right? There are other teams that want him too. The Baltimore Orioles probably want to go out there and get a center fielder. They are probably the only team in baseball that can outmatch the Mariners in terms of prospects they can give up. And that is what makes the Mariners so dangerous at this trade deadline, is that they can go out there and they have some of the best prospects in baseball. They have 8 by MLB Pipeline or something like that in the top 100. They can go out there and basically make any trade they want to, and because of that, they have a better chance than, say, the Yankees to get some of these guys, or even the Astros to get some of these guys. The Mariners need to go out there and make those big moves now, because the clock is ticking. And with how bad we've seen this team be recently, obviously big games here coming up against the Padres and then the Angels going into the All-Star break, but you cannot come out of this All-Star break especially without making changes to this offensive ball club. It was a few weeks ago, but I did have some guys that I think no one was talking about the Mariners should want to trade for. I have that video on the screen right now. I appreciate you guys watching this one, and go Mariners.